Yeah, mostly the way that we've been trained to look at something needs to be shifted. A lot of what we think is happening is a simpleton way of thinking, which is based on superstition and not based on fact, and looking deeper at what other possibilities could be explanations for why a group of people might come down with a similar set of symptoms. Like in a school, for example, like you said, I mean, a lot of the time they've eaten the same food at the cafeteria and they've been given food poisoning, and food poisoning symptoms can look like flu. And not everybody gets it. So why wouldn't everybody get it? Why will only some people get it? You have to ask that question. And then you have to think about what else could be happening in a situation where you see a pattern. And a lot of people can't seem to see patterns. I think that's part of our blinders as humans. Maybe it's been trained out of us or dumbed down out of us or something, but missing understanding cycles of things and patterns of things, that every so often we are triggered by external causes, which could be as simple as a weather change. For certain people who don't regularly eat well, who don't regularly detoxify their body actively, to be triggered into expression of wastes, which have a set of symptoms that go along with it. Another problem I found is a lot of people have been taught to associate a symptom with something bad because it's uncomfortable. So if you have a runny nose, or you have itchy eyes, or you have a scratchy throat, then it's okay, it's bad, right? But they don't understand that it's a bodily mechanism that's actually being activated in order to purge something from the body, or to correct the body. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a so-called problem, the only problem being that you obviously didn't have enough nutrition to process the toxins appropriately through the means of the liver. You were unable to mount that properly, so the body had to go through a secondary route of removing it, which is using some of the other routes of elimination, which are the lungs and the skin, the mucus, right? The urine, whatever it has to get out, because the body is going to preserve life at all costs. And so instead of realizing that the symptom is actually there for a reason, people instead say it's bad and I have to suppress it. I have to make it go away. And then if I make the symptom go away, then I'm well. And that's where we see the increases in chronic disease, because we don't allow acute diseases anymore. We don't permit the seasonal expression to come out of people that have been poisoned by air and food and water and stress and all of these other lifestyle factors. And if they were really wise, they would do what people like myself do, or anybody, or I'm sure yourself as well, Amy, being in the health field. You take care of your body, you take care of your terrain, you pay attention to the subtle symptoms before they become overt. So if you're feeling a little bit low energy, you question that. You go, well, maybe I'm missing something in my diet right now. Have I been eating well, or have I been doing something that hurts me? Like, have I been, not drinking enough water, or have I been wearing a mask all day, which does self-harm? Or have I been, drinking lots of coffee or alcohol, or restricting something healthy inside of me? Or have I been poisoning myself actively with drugs? And the body has to do a workaround. So if you want to understand how the body works, then it's pretty simple. The toxins have to come out one way or another. The nutrition has to be present, because that's the biochemistry that runs all of your systems. And you have to consider the other layers of the human, which are the mental layers and the emotional aspects. And those all can lead to sickness and certain types of expression. So if somebody has a fever, this is one of the ones that bothers me a lot, especially in the culture, right? You see it in a lot of movies and television shows, which are there to subtly brainwash people into thinking that a fever is bad. Like, how many shows have I watched where, like, oh, they have a fever, get that fever down right away, no matter what. And the hero at the end, what did they do? They put ice on them and they got the fever down, and then they were healed magically. And it's a lie. It's not how the body works at all. It's Hollywood magic. You want the fever. The fever is what does the job. The fever is what heals the body. Even super high fevers are working well for the body. You just want to stay hydrated and fast and make sure that the body can recover through the healing crisis, which people also have no idea about. They have no understanding of a healing crisis and what that is, and that you only get to that place if you've really done a disservice to your body for a really long time. Then there's no way around it. You're going to have a healing crisis. It's going to be uncomfortable and you're not going to like it. And if you continue to suppress the healing crisis, then you will die. The organism will fail. And to me, I think it's all very simple, and truth does get into simplicity, and where you can speak it in a sentence, ultimately. So that's part of that goes into part of the philosophy. But, the germ theory aspect is there's other ways to explain why a group of people would get sick at the same time. Also resonance or vibrational triggers. We're energy beings. We're tribal as well. There's people who are similar in their DNA compared to others. There's similar environmental factors that overlap. And we have hormone signaling as well. We should know we have pheromones and that they cause effects on people, like women to men in pheromones, or women to women when they start to have their menstrual cycles together. They're not catching their menstrual cycle from one another. There's another signal happening there when they're in close contact. And the nurse Florence Nightingale, she understood contagion was not true because she had a bunch of soldiers in a hospital room with closed windows that progressed from one disease type to another in the same space. And all that, and then what she realized is that the fever was changing and the disease was worsening because there was no airflow, and these toxic soldiers, which had been vaccinated, were just recycling through the air all of their own poisons. They just kept reabsorbing the gases from each other. When she opened the window, they all healed.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting because one of the things I remember coming across in your research was exosomes, and I was thinking about people getting what we call the flu in a school setting, and thinking about, well, if your body, if the cells are detoxing and you have developed these exosomes and then they're released into the environment, then could somebody take them up, and like like they're gassing in a room that has poor ventilation, and that leads to exposure to something toxic, and it's not necessarily what we consider a virus, but it becomes an environmental toxin.
well, there's different particles. There's not just exosomes.
Hmm.
It's a fun catchphrase, I think, for a lot of people to use to try to explain it, and that's
Okay.
okay.
Hmm.
But there's actually a lot more particles involved, and like the somatids or the proteins or the microzyma, as they've been named by individual researchers, are really a lot of the repair tools. So there's nucleic acid particles surrounded by these proteins, and they go to an area that's damaged to see how much cellular debris can be repaired before it's actually removed. And those also become waste particles eventually that can look like so-called viruses. They also have, little blebs around them. The little smaller versions of the proteins just look like tiny little balls with DNA or RNA in them, so that you could confuse them for that. Exosomes also aren't just waste material. They're tools inside the body to communicate from one cell structure to another. So they might actually send nutrients across, not just wastes. And then you have the phages, and phages are like basically shock proteins from bacteria that want to preserve their own DNA or RNA. And that's when the conditions have become suddenly detrimental to the bacterium, and they will create the phage. But if it's a slow environmental suppression, it will go into basically a sporoform, uh, which takes a bit more time to manufacture by the bacterium. So the lineage wants to preserve itself because it's essential to life. So I hope people understand, when you realize that the bacterium is essential to our life, to life on this earth, and that it will preserve itself at all costs. So if it's a slow kill, it will go one way, and if it's a fast kill, it will go another way to preserve itself because it's vital to life. So spraying everything down with, antimicrobials and using antibiotics and using vaccines destroys life. That's all it does, and it alters our life.